There's a conversation I've been wanting to have for a long time on this channel, and it only took a multi-million-dollar Hollywood-fronted marketing campaign to make it a reality. Today I'm going to talk to Lokke Heiss, a vampire scholar specifically of Nosferatu. Kind of his life's work has been digging into the 1922 Nosferatu film. That, of course, makes him one of the top people I wanted to talk to when it was announced that Robert Eggers' more recent Nosferatu was actually going to happen and wasn't just going to linger on in rumor and development hell like so many films do. Lokke has invested a lot of his own time and resources in digging up information about the 1922 original Nosferatu. But we're going to end up having a conversation about all the major Nosferatu releases, as well as some origin stories on how these films came to be. So it's unavoidable that there's going to be a little bit of spoiler things happening here, but not severely so, because we're not doing movie reviews. That's not what this channel is. We're not doing plot synopses. We're not doing any of that. We are going to be talking about how the films echo each other, how they change, and why. What do they say? That sort of thing. So if you're interested in that, stick around. If you want to watch the films without any kind of prejudice, maybe see the films or at least one of them before watching this interview. But I think if you are someone who is invested in the Nosferatu legends and how Nosferatu came to be, or if you've read some of the press around the Eggers release and you think you have a good handle on the history, prepare to have your mind blown. Because Lokke knows a lot of stuff that popular history is getting wrong about Nosferatu, and you can guarantee we are going to talk about that. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Lokke Heiss. Lokke, you're a film historian and a medical doctor, two things we don't always see go hand in hand. I hope you're not a phlebotomist, because that would reflect poorly on your Dracula obsession.
I'd say I am a phlebotomist, and since I haven't done it in 20 years, I would probably be rather poor at it.
Were you really a phlebotomist? I just pulled that out.
Medical students become phlebotomists.
Okay.
That's part of the trade.
Well, Lokke, you've specialized in the original 1922 Nosferatu, and now you've had a chance to see the 2024 one, and I'm sure you've seen Werner Herzog's, and maybe you've seen a couple of the independent ones that didn't get quite as much fanfare. I'm wondering, now that you've seen all these versions of Nosferatu, is there something that stands out as being the signature of Nosferatu that it doesn't share with other vampire movies?
I asked that question to some friends, and I got the same answer from everybody. What they all said was the same, which I think I'd seen the film so many times it sort of didn't register with me anymore. But the universal answer was that Orlok is scary. He's, you see him, he looks a little weird at first, and he looks a little worse. And I think that slow buildup, and then you have the complete exposure when he's approaching Hooter to kill him. And I think, now you really see a very scary looking creature coming towards you. And I think anybody who's seen all the other Dracula adaptations, this is very different. And, it tells us right away we're not going to get the suave European seducer in this version.
No. In fact, I wonder if it's part of... I wonder if this new Nosferatu, the Robert Eggers one, might be kind of the peak of a backlash against the pretty vampires that we had through the 2000s. Because I think about Renfield, Nicolas Cage's Dracula was not exactly attractive, I didn't think. Voyage of the Demeter, a couple other vampire movies that came out, or series that came out, like Midnight Mass over the past couple years. We had this kind of return to unsavory vampires, not vampires we wanted to have sex with anymore. Do you think that Nosferatu is kind of our best entry into that, or is it an indicator of more to come?
It's a little hard to think of a corpse-like creature more obscene than Eggers' version of Nosferatu, with where there are worms crawling out of his back, or we should tell everybody that we're going to do a lot of spoilers in this show.
Yeah, to have this discussion, we have to kind of look back and survey the all the Nosferati, if it's plural, that have come out, and you can't do that without spoilers. And I think if you've seen, for those of you watching this, if you've seen at least one or two of the versions of Nosferatu, you'll have a deeper appreciation of what Lokke's going to share.
If you know what a vampire is, and if you know what their purpose is, if you know the Dracula at all, you don't have to be familiar with the other versions. Although, knowing the Murnau version certainly will give you a heads up on what's going on in this.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's do a little comparison. You were telling me before we started recording that there's something that irritates you about all the reviews you've seen of this new Nosferatu.
It's, I think, important to talk about this before anything else, because I've been reading lots of reviews the last couple of days, and common to many reviews are some comments that are distressing to me because they're wrong. This is an example of, in medicine we call this anchor bias, and we saw this, in fact, to sidetrack a bit, in the COVID pandemic. The anchor bias was about testing, and they talked about the importance of Sorry, this is getting medical, but PCRs versus rapid tests. And rapid tests were a far more effective test as an outpatient, but their anchor bias, it all came down on the other side first. And even now today, I think as we talk, people aren't clear about the advantage of one test over the other. And I use this is an anchor bias of what happened with David Scow. He wrote this book, Hollywood Gothic, which is this great survey over Dracula's history from page to screen. And he does talk about Florence Stoker's lawsuit, and he does in a very...
Can I interject for a second here, Lokke?
Yeah.
Just for the people who aren't familiar, the story goes that Nosferatu came out in 1922. It was an unlicensed adaptation of Dracula. Florence Stoker, Bram Stoker's widow, sued, and as the story goes, the court sided with her and ordered all copies of Nosferatu destroyed. However, a few were saved, and we have it today. That's how the story goes. So tell me what's wrong with that story.
Yeah, I mean, and David kind of described this, but he put a little, let's see, I would have done the same thing. He put a flavor of detection. This was like she became the vampire hunter, and there was some truth to that. So most of what you said there is still accurate, but there's some things to remember that were really going on. One was that the story is often set up like urban folk, that there was an intent to deceive, and no records or evidence has been shown that they had any intent to deceive anybody when they made this film. It was common for studios to do adaptations of literary work, and copyright was in its infancy then, and normally people didn't get into trouble with this kind of adaptation. And in fact, Murnau, the film he had made before Nosferatu, was a version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which had come out only 10 years or so before Stoker. And they called the lead character Dr. Jekyll. So, and nobody thought twice about that film. And you haven't seen any kind of discussion about how they were avoiding copyright and so on and so on. No, it never came up. And they did change the names, but that made a lot of sense because they also changed in 1897 is when Dracula is printed. To take place. And this is 1843. It's so, and in a different country, different characters. It's supposed to be a German story, so it makes perfect sense to change the names of the characters. So when you look at the whole picture, there is absolutely no sign of any intent that they were trying to deceive anybody. So that's one. Two, her lawsuit did not bankrupt Piranha. You see that all the time in the press.
Piranha Films, the people who produced the 1922 Nosferatu.
Yeah, she sued them, bankrupted the thing, and ordered all copies destroyed. Would we all like to be so powerful in a lawsuit, going to another country? So what did happen was that one of the people that had invested in Piranha turned out to be a crook, and he was found guilty and went to jail, and so the assets of Piranha disappeared. completely, like in a very short time, and they went bankrupt. And so the assets were bought by receiver. So when Florence Stoker starts her lawsuit, she's not even suing Prana anymore. She's suing a receiver who frankly doesn't care at all about the film, or they're looking at the film as assets. They're trying to make some money out of it. So she did not bankrupt Prana. One of the people who was Prana bankrupted Prana by cheating in the stock market in some way. So that was two. Number three, there's no evidence that a single film was destroyed. And it is true that the judge ordered the films destroyed, but you have to understand that what happened was that the receiver of Prana went ahead with the normal schedule, and the film went around Europe. We have evidence that the film was screened all over Europe, except England, but that might not have been screened there anyway. And after a normal run of the film, which got reasonably good results as far as we can tell, the life of the film was over. So when that film was over, the lawsuit was being pursued, and the receiver went into I think it's called nola contendere. That's no contest. They didn't want to spend another penny on the lawsuit, and so the judge summarily said, "Okay, Florence, the other person has abandoned the lawsuit. You win," and then he wrote that order. So the effect was not that the film police, the German film police, who I guess destroy films by court order, were going to somehow find all the copies and burn them. What the order did do was it probably made them less interested in trying to export the film, and particularly to England. And we have evidence that years later there was an attempt to screen the film in England, and Florence Stoker saw that and asked for it not to be screened. But that actually had nothing to do with the result of the judge. That was that she had heard that there was going to be a screening going on. So there was no intent to deceive. It did not bankrupt the Prana, and most importantly, none of these films were destroyed. It wasn't that the court order how could you have carried that court order out? All the films were all sent off to the different locations. Once they were out of Germany, they got screened they were screened in Paris, but had a lot of positive comments there, which was one of the reasons the film got saved. So after all this was done, the films, did their normal thing. And what happens to most films is they get destroyed on their own because they have the film has value, and they just recycle the products, or it just gets thrown out. So like half of all these silent films are all gone anyway, and nobody was doing that, responding to court orders from those. But happily, because the film had been screened around Europe and other parts of the world, what happens is that not all of them get thrown out or reused. They get put in closets and stuff. And in Paris in particular, they were saved probably for more artistic reasons. And so, the film had the same fate that most silent films did of that era, and happily a few of them copies survived.
Do you see any indication that it influenced vampire movies immediately beyond that scene that you just mentioned in Dracula? How long did it take before vampire films started picking up on this sunlight as a weapon against vampires? And can we actually draw a line to Nosferatu and credit Nosferatu for that, or is that a misconception as well?
No. Of course, now we're off of the Van Helsing, Florence Stoker route, which I just wanted to dispel that myth, because I think I saw part of that in a New Yorker review just today, and I went, "Oh no," because people think you read the New Yorker, they think, "Oh, that must be accurate." But once the myth picks up speed, it's hard to knock it down. Absolutely, what the folk myth of the vampire is that the sun doesn't destroy them, but it reduces their power, which is exactly what Stoker, has in his novel. They come to more like human power, and they're not like killed. So I think, and all of us would love to know where that came from, but it's certainly clear in the Murnau version, very much what happens. And at some point, I don't know I don't remember the first vampire film that showed sunlight I know it's there in the Hammer Dracula, so it's there in the 50s, but I can't think of an earlier version. So somebody could come up with an earlier version that would be helpful. But that's 50. That would be 58 or so. So somebody had seen. Oh, I mean, let me.
I,
let me
yeah, I think
expand
of the
on-
Hammer too. Is the first place my head goes is Hammer, but I wonder if there was a more under the radar vampire movie before that, in between Dracula and the Hammer Draculas.
Yeah, let
that
me
would
expand on
have-
that a minute, though. In the early Dracula, the Hammer Dracula, the stagecoach goes by a shrine, and it's a clear to me. It's a clear reference to the Murnau film, because why put that in if you didn't? If, it's just not something you'd put in otherwise, and the shrine becomes somewhat important to the plot afterwards. So, we see that in the Murnau film, and that's to me is huge evidence that the person who, at least the screenwriters, were familiar with the Murnau. The film was around. It was around mostly in the Cinémathèque Française. They were the ones that championed the film through the 30s and then into the 40s.
And that shrine comes up in the 2024 film as well.
Yes, although you tell me things are flashing by fast. They go by the shrine, don't they?
I'm thinking of the one he walks by before he crosses a bridge.
Yes, that's right. That's
stage.
exactly right. So the shrine is in the film too, but it's not while they're driving in the stagecoach. He walks, because I guess the moment he crosses the bridge, that he's going, the shrine isn't going to be there anymore. And now he's in the evil world. In fact, if we could maybe I could go talk about me watching the film. I saw it for the first time last night, and I came in a little, skeptical is not the word, but I was concerned what they were going to do with my baby, so to speak, since I've been, involved with this film. By the way, I got involved in this film in a very backwards way. I was taking a class from David Shepard, film historian, who put out all these discs and videos back in the 80s, 90s. But I was at film school, and at the end of the semester, I had to do a term paper, and it could be of any silent film of my choice. And I was weighing between Hell's Hinges, which is a William S. Hart wonderful Western, and this film, Nosferatu. And because I was lazy, I decided to do it on Nosferatu because I'd seen it before. I'd seen it more recently, and I thought this will be an easier film to do a term paper on. And David liked the paper so much, he asked me if I wanted to expand it into a commentary track.
So that's how you ended up. I failed to mention this when I was introducing you, but you've done a commentary track on a DVD release of Nosferatu.
It was done back in the 90s, early 90s, and also was on the Laserdisc back then. So it's out of, I don't say out of print. I mean, it hasn't been, it's been updated several times. And once it was updated with my commentary track, but my name was conveniently forgotten anywhere on the cover. But
that's kind of appropriate for a film like Nosferatu.
Well, yeah. At that point, I sort of consigned myself to part of the story of that. That's kind of the nature of this business. And but I watched the film last night, and I was saying I was a little nervous when I first started, and then I got about 10 or 15 minutes into the film, and then something happens in the film, and my eyes go wide, because what happens, what I'm seeing is Eggers solves the flower problem.
Tell me more. I think I know the scene you're talking about, but tell me what you mean when you say he solves it.
He solves it. Well, so in the Murnau film, you have to understand it's only about 94 minutes long. So it for a silent film, it races by. And instead of a lot of scenes, they really have what I would call signposts rather than scenes, which is good and bad. I mean, the signposts are, if something happens, it means something. As an audience, you're trying to figure out what it means, and while you're trying to figure out, now you're on the next scene, which is a kind of a modern, in this sense, Murnau was a very modern filmmaker. And the signposts are these symbols, which are very impacted with a lot of different meanings. And for an example, near the beginning of the film, Hutter gives Ellen flowers, and instead of her being happy, she says, why have you killed the flowers? We as the audience are equally perplexed as Hutter. And it's a translation issue too. In German, a translation I've seen, why have you destroyed the flowers? Which, is even more, you're going, what the hell's going on? And, later, that's actually lingering in your head. And now you're on to other signposts that keep going until perhaps things get a little clearer when you're in the castle and he cuts the blood, and you see him. Now you're clearly in more of a vampire story, but so obviously Eggers is, as I've read, he studied this film kind of like what I have, right? He's so Eggers takes that flowers and he expands on this whole scene, and not only does he, explain why she's unhappy, but we learn more that she has these sort of latent powers going on, and we have all this going on. It's a portent of things going on, and finally they name the flowers as lilacs. And it hit me that, okay, Eggers has done me one better, because of all the years I've seen this movie, not once have I ever wondered what kind of flowers they were. But not only did he come up with the whole backstory to the flowers, but he's named it. Or as Foucault, you might say, he's named the rose, as Echo might say. And now that even has a thread that goes further in the film. So he has fixed the scene. And what I see with that going on is, it hits me is that Eggers has done a $50 million fan fiction story, which I don't say this to be pejorative in any way. I say it out of like, wow, how many of us would do $50 million fan? And that's what he does through most of the rest of the film, is that he takes all these kind of signposts in the original story and he kind of expands or has his own take on them.
Can I push back on you for a second, Lokke? Because I remember the scene in the original film, and I didn't quite understand what it meant. And I don't know that I'm any clearer on why the flowers are dead or what that means. Apart that Ellen has the shining is the way I think about it. She shines, like in Stephen King terms. But I don't understand now, having named the flowers. Walk me through that. How is that solving the problem?
So in the Murnau film, you have to guess. That's a signpost tells you that something is coming, but it's not. It doesn't tell you much, right? So we know something. It means something weird happened. So now we start getting into Freud. Like what is, because it's dream logic. This whole Murnau film is all dream. Cut flowers. It's a sign of loss of fertility. Is Thomas impotent? Because the flowers is this a form of castration? Now, all these things are possible, or none of them could be possible, but because you have to start guessing, it produces sort of this weird psychic dislocation. And Eggers' goal here is to kind of, dilate on all those themes. At least that's how he explains that she is a psychic, basically, that she has this connection of Nosferatu before he even leaves on the trip. Which, you can sort of get that from the discussion that Canuck has with, because you see this mystical sign language that's, in the pig. And so it's true that there might have been actually something, and we even see this in the original Dracula. So I think Eggers is completely legitimately pulling from all these sources. He's pulling from the original Dracula novel. He's pulling from some of Murnau's visual imagery, and coming up with a reason for why she would react so strongly to someone who's trying to give her a bouquet.
Well, speaking of problems that Eggers solves, I did appreciate that prologue scene between Ellen and Orlok earlier than the events of the film, because I think he is trying to solve kind of the biggest problem we have with Dracula and with Count Orlok, and that why her? What's so special about her? Why come to England for that? And I think that Eggers does his best and does a pretty good job of explaining why she's the significant quarry for Orlok.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that, Thomas Hutter doesn't know it, but one of the things in this film is that I can't find that Thomas Hutter has any fault at all, except for that perhaps he's fallen in love with someone who is, in effect, a mutant, something like Jean Grey or Scarlet Witch, who has some psychic connections with powerful occult forces. And I think that's what Bram Stoker was kind of indicated, that there are people who are more susceptible. This gets back to the whole genre of the hypnotic narrative, which was really popular in 1880 and still, popular in the 1920s, less so today. So I think it's relevant that he spends some time explaining what was going on, and certainly that is exactly what's going on. He's explaining that this, in a sense, was almost forecast. It was something that was it was destiny.
And that is a very smart way to solve that problem, I think.
Yeah. I looked up. Sorry, I looked up the fanfic, and there's actually a subgenre called fix-it fic or fix fic, where somebody goes through a story and the type of fiction that changes or improves something that the writer found problematic.
Okay.
Boy, that sure.
Well, this is that. This is, if Nosferatu, the original one, was fanfic of Dracula, this is fix-it fic for Nosferatu.
Exactly. Fix it, fix the fix or some kind of tongue twister.
Well, there's a lot of things I'd like to ask you about, but I want to make sure I address this one. The word Nosferatu is going to be unfamiliar to most people. It's a creepy sounding word. I think it's only said one time in the novel Dracula, if I'm right.
I think twice.
Twice? Okay. So it does come from the novel Dracula, at least. Well, we're going to find out. It doesn't come from Dracula, but the filmmakers probably mined it from Dracula. Where did Dracula get it from, and what's the etymology of that word?
So I've been pursuing that since, 1994, which is a little scary to even think about how many years.
You're the Van Helsing in this case, because I've seen you give a talk on this, and you know this better than anybody. I think people who are unfamiliar are going to be really impressed with what you have to say right now.
Well, I've created yes. You're going to tell them about the lawsuit that I had about the receiver of the name down in Transylvania. No, I haven't caused any lawsuits, but I did pursue the name comes from the book novel, and Stoker got it because he was a good researcher and did a lot of investigations, and he found. First, it was a chapter in a magazine called 19th Century, and then he found the book. And it's a book by a woman named Emily Gerard. She was a Scotswoman who married an Austrian cavalry officer, and they spent 2 years in Transylvania. And she wrote a travel book about her time there, and in a book that's appropriately called Land Beyond the Forest.
Sylvania, Land Beyond the Forest. Making sure everybody gets it.
So Emily Gerard's a person worth some pursuit. She herself was a novelist. She wrote often with her sister, and she wrote some very good books, including a fictional book about an area of Transylvania that I visited called, in English, it's called the Waters of Hercules. And in it, there's a bottomless pit there called the Dracula's Cave, and the climax of the story centers around being in this Dracula's cave and all the things that go on there. So I think that was coincidental. I don't know if Stoker saw that novel. It would have been available to him, but I don't think he did. And it wouldn't have mattered.
That name, Dracula's Cave, predates the novel Dracula?
So the word Dracula is historical, and just means son of Dracula. Or son of the devil, son of the dragon, otherwise son of the devil. And that name was in Romania. It's a Romanian name. So you find it she found it in Plow. Well, I think she found it in that area of Romania. And I tried to find the pit. What I found didn't quite, it wasn't called that anymore. But she had the name already from another source, and she used it in her own novel. Interestingly enough, but it was a name of something. It wasn't the name. There was a bad villain but he was, not a vampire. He was just, the antagonist in the story. So anyway, Emily Gerard wrote about Land Beyond the Forest, and then she has a chapter on supernatural things going on in the country, and there's a paragraph when she talks about werewolves and vampires, and she names vampire as Nosferatu. So Stoker,
and she allows the reader to believe that is the local name for vampires.
I think when you write, she spends the whole book naming things and talking about different elements. And so, yeah, she has this paragraph which describes different kind of supernatural beliefs. One of them was vampires, which she called the Nosferatu was the most evil of them all. And then she talks about werewolves and a few other things. She has discussions about witches, and this is all in the arena of Transylvania itself. She has chapters on culture, on all the different ethnic groups she found there. She has a very interesting chapter on the Saxons who were there. So, she's not trying to do anything more than have a kind of a very broad survey over her 2 years there. And it's worth reading if anybody has interest in that time and period.
The word Nosferatu had a lot of theories go around about it, like where it came from, what the translation meant. What did you find out when you started digging into that?
Well, to cut to the chase, so it turns out that, because there are all these theories about how she misheard something that was, then we come up with all these, closer Romanian words. There was about as many theories as there was Dracula movies, but it turns out that she found the Nosferatu in a book, just like Bram Stoker did. And there was a book in the library where she was stationed with her husband, and the book is from a German folklorist named Wilhelm Schmidt. And in that book, he talks about werewolves and vampires, and you could see that she's just used more or less his paragraph, and she's not word for word, but she's transcribed that information. And large parts of the book were done in the same way. She just did research like Bram did, and so that in word comes from Wilhelm Schmidt, and so future investigators will have to dig down and to see what he published that book in 1865, about 23 years before she found it. And my best guess, which is completely reasonable, was when Schmidt's looking around, there's about 4 or 5 ethnic groups active in that location, the Saxons I just talked about, but there's lots of Slavs there, and it is more of a Slavic. The vampires are a Slavic entity. In Romania, it's more of the Strigoi, which is all kinds of witches. And as one Romanian scholar told me, we have all kinds of chairs for our own Romanian evil demons and ghosts. The Strigoi, he named a few others, but there's no chair for the vampire, which I thought was a good way to put it, because it doesn't have that same impact. But it doesn't mean that a lot of people living in Romania had their own ethnic backgrounds, and the Slavs had theirs. So probably Schmidt was hearing different people talk about it, and he talked about someone who was from a Slavic background talked about the vampire tradition, and then the word probably comes from that area of the ethnic background. So it was in Romania, it just wasn't from a Romanian speaker.
Okay, so that's a new take that I'm hearing right now, because if you go online and you say, what does Nosferatu mean, you'll get a couple, like you said, as many as there are Dracula movies, usually centering around something like plague carrier, which makes complete sense, except what I then later heard is that word Nosferatu does not appear in Romanian or Slavic. And now I think what you're telling me is that maybe the word did appear somewhere.
Well, it's probably, localism is what we call it. And it's still possible it could be a Romanian localism, which means it was, before people could read or write, the oral language was shifting and moving constantly. So you can completely see in the 1860s, there would have been a lot of people who were illiterate, and these words could have been around for 10 or 20 years and then gone out of style or fashion. And that could have been, so it could be a Romanian word, but my best guess is that it's a Slavic word, but with the same issues, because the Slavs are moving up and down and around. And if you didn't read or write and you just heard the word and then someone else hears the word, so who knows, it could have come from a lot of different things.
Well, there's a lot of scholarly work being done just on the word vampire and its origins, and not quite as much, but also every now and then you see an article come out, a scholarly work come out about the word Nosferatu, and maybe we'll learn something new very soon.
Well, I think that the key there would be to go pursue Schmidt's background and work. So, at some point, if I get the chance, when I go back to Romania, I will pursue that. And I think if we find some more information, that might help us and determine how. He heard it from somebody. He certainly didn't come out of the air. But now we know that we can't blame Emily for making the word up. She took the word.
And she was getting blamed for that for a year or two before you or somebody else found Wilhelm Schmidt. Was it you? Did you find Wilhelm Schmidt?
I found that there was it's in another text, and I think I found Schmidt in an alternate text. It was a slightly different spelling, which to me actually made it more likely to be accurate, because as we're talking about the oral tradition, and I think I found that in one of his essays at the British Library, but I didn't find the one that's in the library and let's see, one of the in Brasov, I think that was found by somebody else who I can't come up with the name.
Well, we have friends who live in Brasov. They probably just went on down to the library and looked it up.
Right. It got, if you know what you're looking up, it would have been pretty easy.
Well, I've already kind of kept you longer than I had intended, Lokke, but I want to ask you, kind of close on this one thing, because it feeds into your other background. The original Nosferatu came out shortly after the Spanish flu had decimated the world, not to mention World War I. And this film comes out just as we're coming out of a COVID pandemic, and we're dealing with our own threats of a World War III every other day. I can't say that it was an intent to release this film now, because I know that they were talking about making this film as far back as 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
But is history rhyming here?
Yes, I think it absolutely is. And I think people will, there's something called emotional resonance, and I think people will pick up on that. Although I think Eggers, he could speak for himself, but I think his intent, as you say, I think if the film had come out before COVID, it would have been probably pretty similar. So I don't think that it was author intent, but history has a way of making us look at a film because of the circumstances when it came out. And certainly I think I would make a stronger case that Murnau's film is very much a hangover from the desolation and incredibly awful, 4 years of the First War. And I think the scenes of the funeral and so on are really speaking to that. I think even more so than any kind of a pandemic. The flu was, I think, just the cap on the skull's cap to that. The war itself was terrible enough, and then people end up dying anyway. And I do think that there's certainly something there. But I mean, these things cycle around, and one of the emotional resonance that really is generated from the Murnau film, and to give Eggers credit, he does pick up on this. I see it in his film, is Caspar David Friedrich, his paintings, and there's a Friedrich painting called Abbey in the Oakwood, where you see this monks with a coffin, and it's right out of. I mean, you can see that Murnau has used that for inspiration for his really upsetting scene when the people are coming out in the funeral. So Murnau uses a series of tableaus of Friedrich's paintings that very much impact for anybody paying attention in the Murnau film. You get these really desolate scenes of Ellen pining for her lover at the seashore, and those very evocative scenes. And one of them would be the funeral scene, which sort of comes out of nowhere, right? You just see these people coming out, but it's where it is. It's coming from Friedrich, and audiences who see it now, they won't get the Friedrich connection, but they'll get the emotional resonance behind that of sadness, of somberness, of death. And that's all coming out. And Eggers does pick up on that too. And I think that he slyly puts in a reference to Friedrich because one of the people in the film is named Friedrich. His first name is Friedrich.
That's right. The side friend character.
Right. So I think that you're right in the larger sense that it picks up on this. I'm not sure how the audience is going to. I'm not sure how much the audience was going to pick up on this particular film, if only because it's now 4 or 5 years after. I think if it had premiered in 2022, there would have been a more obvious connection, and it's still there though.
Yeah, I'm glad we didn't rush it. I'd said for years that I would believe this movie was coming out when it came out because it was always being rumored. But I'm glad we waited. I think we got the movie we needed.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's probably picked the right time to come out because it could be understood on its own kind of. When I sort of half joke about the fiction, although that's absolutely what's going on there. But you could argue that true of any adaptation is some version of, fixing one. Of course, the thing with an adaptation is you fix one part and you cause 2 or 3 more problems for someone else to solve.
Well, I'm sure Herzog was probably fixing some things that he saw as problems in the silent film.
Well, he always talks about the trouble he had with his rats. There's an ad in the paper. In a German paper from 1921, it wanted lively rats for film, and it's always a fun ad to look at. You can see that Murnau had put out an ad for lively rats, but Herzog talks about all the troubles with the rat hurting the rats, and just gave him. I think it gave him more trouble than, well, maybe not more trouble than his famous actor.
Klaus Kinski, yeah.
Yes, well, maybe not
famously hard to work with actor.
My favorite fiend, but I mean, Herzog wasn't clearly not used to trying to herd rats from point A to point B. But yeah, he creates his own issues, and that's just true with anybody who makes a movie. You're going to fix one problem and create 2 or 3 others. And what I see with Eggers' film is that he sort of has eluded some of the homoerotic elements of the novel and of Murnau's film, which is very homoerotic in many areas, and. I
don't know, man. I think the homoeroticism is still there.
Well,
maybe I'm telling on myself, but I saw it.
Well, the connection between Hutter and Orlok is I think de-emphasized in this film, and it's very much more emphasized as a bond between Ellen and Orlok. And of course, the Murnau film has that too. So it's that's a very arguable point. But I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about the subtext of going on. I think that the Murnau film is, because of the signposts, allow for all kinds of different interpretations. And I think Eggers is solving some of those while he's creating a bunch of others. And but I think that was. I'm sure he, at least on some level, intended that.
Well, maybe we'll get another Nosferatu in 2054 or so, and we can solve all the problems that people will start to identify with the Eggers version that maybe we can't see because it's still so fresh in our minds.
It'll be interesting to see with the critical. I mean, there's been very mixed reviews. I haven't seen anybody suing Eggers for copyright problems. I guess it was 1929, isn't it? Where I guess he's okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can famously you can use the original Nosferatu in anything now, and we all have.
What was your favorite part about the new film?
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot here. I appreciated that. We kind of said this, that there was a little bit of a backstory between Ellen and Orlok that gave Orlok something to do other than, I'm coming to England because, and I'm seeking out this one specific person because. Now, as I say that, I think that there's still a problem that exists in the story that maybe Eggers didn't solve, and that is, well, what would have happened next? If Orlok had successfully drained Ellen, then what was the plan? Why move to England? Or in his head, was he not going to drain her? Did he want a permanent union with her? Were they going to make little baby Orloks? I don't know. That question is still unanswered. What was his greater plan apart from that?
Well, I'd say it was more like in the Mummy era, where the fate and reincarnation issues. These are eternal lovers that were destined to self annihilate each other at the end. So she couldn't help but I mean, this gets very Lacanian. There's a lot of stuff going on in this movie, and Lacan talks about how you desire the other, but what you really desire is that the other desire you. That's what's really going on, and that's absolutely what's going on at the end of this film. He doesn't want just to desire her; he wants her to desire him, and that's the connection that's made there. And so when that happens, he really can't go because he's made the connection, and it's like they have matter and antimatter. They have to annihilate each other because that's the whole point of the Lacanian connection. And poof, they're all sort of dead at the end. And
you gotta walk a little further to get to what you said. But I like that interpretation better than what he really wanted was death, and he needed to be with Ellen to die. I can see someone pulling that out, and I respect it, but the film didn't seem to indicate that was really what he was going for.
Yeah, I think the trouble is that we tend to take things literally, and I think in this part of the film, in the Murnau, allegory is easier because it's such a simplified plot. But this is the opposite of allegory. This is like you're getting all the grungy details, and so it's harder to kind of backtrack and look at this as allegory. But if you look at it as allegory, then you're not so worried about what the final intent was, because there were she and her. He says, "I'm your appetite." So what does that mean? It means that's appetite is a form of desire. So they don't actually die at the end as much as they get fulfilled. There's a fulfillment that happens at the end, which is, I guess you could say, as a happy ending. I mean, the Murnau film has something similar going on. There's the two die, but on the other hand, the cock crows means everything's good.
There's definitely a bittersweet ending, and it's hard when you're visually having the sunrise. It almost has to be a positive ending when that's
exactly.
happening.
So it's a positive, and the town's okay again, and the lilacs symbol death, but they also symbol rebirth. And so I wouldn't say the ending is tragic. It's bittersweet because there's been a lot of people die, but on the other hand, a cycle it's about cycles. It's all about cycles, and we have that in the Murnau with Canuck, and he's going through the pumpkin farm patch or something, and we have this idea of fertility and cycles. And I think that's, if you're getting to the subtext about these two films, I think that's really where you're getting to fertility symbols and rites of passage and cycles, and you're not even talking about people as characters as people anymore.
The Herzog film had a little more of a denouement at the end, whereas this one ends very much like the original Nosferatu. The sun comes up, he dies, credits roll. I appreciated how the Herzog film had a little something, a little epilogue going on, and I was kind of hoping this would too, and it didn't. Were you disappointed, or did you like that the credits rolled as soon as the villain is vanquished?
I'll have to go. I'll go with Murnau and Eggers on this. I think that the scene of the Herzog with him, stopping. I think that's an easy end because you have this. It's almost like a sequel. Stories can end. What was it? Or Orson Welles said you could either endings end in marriages or death or something, and I think that having the new vampire coming out is kind of a. Unless you're going to intend to make a sequel, like Godzilla comes back a second time, you're in some way you're devaluing the original story when you do that, and that's how I felt about Murnau. I mean, the Herzog film.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Eggers should have had, there's still vampires that are out there, but I wanted some falling action. I guess I felt like I needed a little extra satisfaction. I wanted to see Hutter. Crushed. I wanted to see the town dealing with what just went on in their city, that sort of thing. But I didn't get any of that. No,
well, I completely agree with you at that point. It would have been good for maybe a pullback to see the destruction that that this story. It was okay. Well, they've become unified, and now it's the Star Trek, the motion picture. Now V'ger goes off. They've been unified, and they go off to whatever heaven they're going to go to another, but you don't have a sign of all the. In the Murnau film, you actually have the destruction of the castle, And once again, that's sort of a signpost that bad things had happened here. I mean, it's a lot of Murnau's imagery can go both ways. You could say, "Oh, it's over now," but you also can say a lot of bad things happened to get it to go over. And so I take your point. It would have been maybe nice to have had some. There's always a joke about in a comedy you want a little dirt at the end of a comedy. Have you ever heard that description in a genre?
No, I haven't heard that one.
So and this is a good, well-written comedy. You never want just to go off with the saccharine, everything's happy. You want there to be a sour note at the end of any comedy. And like some like it hot. The sour note is when they're in the boat and he says, "I'm going to marry you." And he says, "You can't, I'm a man." And then he says, "Nobody's perfect."
Best ending in any comedy ever.
Because it has this weird kind of sour note to it. And if you look at a lot of Lubitsch films, they have this, weird, it's not funny. It's a sour, but it's done completely on purpose because you don't want the audience to leave with a feeling of saccharineness. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at there. Maybe you want to have the film. Maybe we should write this to Eggers, and when he does his version,
let's fix this. You and me, Lokke.
When we do he does the Titanic. I think they fixed the Starfields for the new version.
Did they really?
Because the Starfield wasn't the real Starfield from the night it went down. So maybe Eggers will put some kind of schmutz in it at the end.
All right, we'll tell him where to send the writer's check to when he figures that out. All right, well, Lokke, thank you for this discussion. I really appreciate it for being here and sharing everything you've learned about Nosferatu over the years. And let me back that off. I know you haven't shared everything. Sharing some of the highlights of what you've learned about Nosferatu over the years.
A lot more, but I think this is a good skimming the surface for the first time, right?
Well, maybe someone can go and find your commentary. In fact, what I'll do is I'll put a link below. If I can find your commentary on YouTube, I'll put a link to that here. Is there anything else you want people to know about? Any projects you have that you're working on in the world of vampires?
Well, in the world of vampires, that is, I am still working on Emily Gerard's family. I've met her great grandparents, grandchildren, I should say, and so more going on there. I have a gothic medical thriller that I hope to publish this year.
Oh, all right.
About a very gothic hospital in part of the United States. So that's going to be my goal this year is to get that published. All
right. Well, looking forward to that. Do you have a title yet, or can you share it?
Why not? Pronounced Dead.
All right. I like it. That's a good title.
Thank you. Well, I hope it'll be out later this year.
All right. Well, thank you, Lokke, and thanks to everybody for watching. We'll see you on a future Toothpickings, I hope, and we'll find something to discuss that is very much in the world of vampires, but we'll let Nosferatu lie back down in his native soil for a while so we won't have to deal with him.
Well, we always know he's going to pop up again sometime.
He's waited centuries. That's right.
All right. Thanks. It was fun.
Hey, thanks for sticking it out with me. I know these interviews tend to go kind of long, but can you blame me? I mean, these are interesting conversations to me, and I don't want to end them. I don't want to chop it down to, 30 seconds or anything like that. To that end, Lokke and I went well over an hour. I'm going to segment out part of it. So there'll be a webcast extra that I will put up in a week or so after this video. So if you want more scholarly thought on Nosferatu, if you want to have your mind blown once again by Lokke, watch this channel. Maybe it's even up already by the time you see this. With that, thanks for being a part of this. Thanks for all your comments that you leave under these videos. I really do appreciate them. Quite the contrast from the stereotype of YouTube comment sections that it can just be a cesspool. I've seen it happen. And your comments have been great. I mean, they're insightful, they're thoughtful. Once in a while, I have my whole worldview turned upside down by them. So I really enjoy the comment section on this channel. So thank you for being a part of it. And I hope you'll continue to be a part of it as we try to push out some more of these over the course of the year whenever opportunity presents itself. Anyway, until next time, stay safe and I'll see you soon.